Today's story is from the Mahabharata. It's about how the Pandavas managed in the forest after escaping assassination, and it includes their search for a 24-hour Dhaba and their encounter with a very hungry evil demon and his not so evil demoness sister. Welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast that will take you on a journey through the rich mythology, folklore, and history of the Indian subcontinent. I am Narad Muni, the celestial storyteller and the original Time Lord. With my ability to travel through space and time, I can bring you fascinating stories from the past, the present, and the future. From the epic tales of the Mahabharata and Ramayana to the folk tales of the Panchatantra, to stories of Akbar Birbal and Tenali Raman, I have a story for every occasion. The purpose of the stories is neither to pass judgment nor to indoctrinate. My goal is only to share these stories with people who may not have heard them before, and to make them more entertaining for those who have. In this episode, we are back to the main storyline of the Mahabharata. You may have heard previous Mahabharata episodes on this show, but if you haven't, that's completely okay. I'll give you a recap of the story so far. The Mahabharata is one of the two greatest epics from India. The other is the Ramayana, which we have also covered. The Mahabharata started with Bhishma, the crown prince of Hastinapur, who gave up all current and future claims to the throne, just to please his dad, the emperor. That put everyone in a terrible spot, because it was a huge problem finding someone capable to rule over Hastinapur. Instead of maybe considering that this was a hint to switch away from a dynastic monarchy and towards democracy, the administrators of the empire persisted in their mad search for a successor in the same royal bloodline. That search persisted across 2 generations, until finally, in the 3rd generation, Hastinapur ended up with the opposite problem. Now, it had too many contenders to the throne. There were 100 Kaurav princes, who were all children of the current emperor, Dhritarashtra. The eldest amongst them was Duryodhan. He often acted like an entitled brat. And all that while, his parents, Dhritarashtra and Gandhari, turned a blind eye. Figuratively, but also literally, because Dhritarashtra had been born blind, and Gandhari had blindfolded herself in solidarity. On the other side were the Pandavas. They were the sons of Dhritarashtra's younger brother, Pandu. Pandu had been younger, but he had been emperor before an unfortunate accident forced him into early retirement, exile, and then an early demise. Yudhishthir was the eldest of the 5 Pandavas, and he was older than Duryodhan, and that led Yudhishthir to believe that he ought to be the next emperor. No one clarified who would succeed Dhritarashtra, And that was the problem at the heart of the Mahabharata. The rivalry between the Kauravas and the Pandavas only kept escalating through their childhood, through university, and then post graduation as well. And by escalation, I really mean escalation. Where we left the story last time was that the Kauravas had set up a deadly trap for their cousins. They gifted the Pandavas a palace. That by itself might not seem like a deadly trap. But this palace was very easily flammable, and there was a plan to set it on fire with the Pandavas inside. Thanks to a tip-off from their uncle Vidur, the Pandavas and their mom, Kunti, managed to escape through a secret tunnel that Vidur had constructed. That's where we'll pick up the story today, with the Pandavas emerging in a dark forest after walking through miles and miles of the secret tunnel. "Mom, I'm hungry," Bhim said. Kunti's reaction could only have been a facepalm. "We literally just ate dinner half an hour ago," she replied. And then, realizing the futility of her argument, she added, "All right, whatever, just take something out of the snack bag. At least, thank goodness, we have a ginormous snack bag." About that," Bhim began. "I ate it all." By this point, Kunti should not have been surprised. But she was. Maybe she should have brought a few cartloads of food for her son. But ordering such large quantities of food might have raised some alarm bells back at the palace. And it might have made people suspicious about the fire that accidentally killed the 6 of them. I should caution you against thinking that Bhim was the ancient Indian version of Obelix from the Asterix and Obelix comic books. Sure, both Bhim and Obelix loved eating. They were both fiercely loyal to their friends. They both got angry easily. And they both had superhuman strength. And they both got their superhuman strength from something they drank when they were children. But that's where the comparison ends. The magic potion that Obelix drank was quite different from the Nagras that Bhim drank in the Kingdom of Snakes, back in episode 139. Kunti shrugged off the comparison between her son and a comic character who hadn't been created yet. They would manage somehow, she thought. Maybe the forest they were heading into would have a dhaba. A dhaba, in case you haven't heard the term before, is a rest stop, fueling station, restaurant, and open-air inn, all rolled into one. The ancient Indian entrepreneur saw an opportunity to establish roadside diners. These dhabas provided a much-needed stop for weary cart drivers who represented the supply chain of the ancient world as they transported cargo from one village to another. That being said, it took a while before the idea became really popular. Probably, a road network had to be developed first, before the idea of dhabas fully blossomed. The twin Pandav children, Nakul and Sahadev, were not cart drivers representing the supply chain of the ancient world, but they were wary. So Kunti thought that if they found a dhaba, there might be some charpais or woven beds for the twins to nap on. Bhim was practically carrying Nakul and Sahadev at this point. They were sitting on his shoulders. Bhim didn't seem to mind. In fact, Kunti thought, there seemed to be a little space on his left shoulder for her to also sit on, just for a short while, to rest her legs. She didn't feel that it was injudicious. Quite the contrary. If you have a son who can carry the weight of 1,000 elephants, it would be injudicious not to let him carry his family when they were tired. It was probably good for Bhim too, because then he could exercise his muscles. Seeing as how they had lost access to the palace, they had lost access to the palace gym as well. So, Kunti climbed on. Bhim offered Arjun and Yudhishthir some space too, on his arms, but they refused. Arjun was worried that if someone saw them, it might be too embarrassing if they leaked it onto ancient Indian social media. Hashtag Epic Fail Arjun would be trending in no time. All in all, Kunti's decision to sit on Bhim's shoulder paid off for an unexpected reason. Because with the advantage of height, she spotted a light in the distance. Our troubles might be over, boys. I think it's a dhaba, she said enthusiastically. Nakul mumbled something and went back to sleep. Sahadev moved his hand as if to snooze an imaginary bedside alarm clock. Bhim was very motivated though. I think I can smell chole bhature. He almost yelped as he broke into a run. Yudhishthir was the only one who was a bit cautious. Wait, everyone! The light at the end of the tunnel might be that of an oncoming train. Bhim paused and turned around to face his elder and allegedly wiser brother. What do you mean? What is a train? I don't think those have been invented yet. And besides, we've been out of the tunnel. We left that one long ago. We are in the forest now. That's not what I meant, Yudhishthir said. Here, I read about these anglerfish. They have a protruding fin that has this bioluminescent light that is really only there to attract other fish. Bhim was getting a little frustrated now. This was no time for a lecture about fish physiology. But it was Kunti who interrupted Yudhishthir. We are in the forest now, as Bhim said. I know my eyesight isn't what it used to be, but I'm pretty sure the light that I'm seeing is not from an anglerfish. No, that's not what I meant, Yudhishthir said. Listen, the anglerfish does that only to lure other fish that it can then eat. The light that you saw, it could be a trap by an evil asur who wants to eat us.
Are asurs tasty to eat?
Bhim asked Kunti. They agreed to proceed with caution, and when they got near the light, Bhim glared at Yudhishthir with an "I told you so" expression, because the light was from a dhaba. It said, in big bold letters, Hidimb, Hidimba the Dhaba. There was nobody around, but that was okay. The food was all there, and that is what mattered to Bhim. He casually tossed his sleeping twin brothers onto a couple of charpais, and he picked up a pot or two. Nakul and Sahadev seemed not to notice. Arjun, Yudhishthir, and Kunti had a little bite to eat and promptly dozed off as well. Only Bhim was burning the midnight oil, while also consuming said oil, along with everything else that was on the table. He didn't really wonder where Hidimb and Hidimba were. Maybe he should have, because right then, Hidimb and Hidimba were in a cave, just 100 feet away. And in a revelation that would have made Yudhishthir glare at Bhim had they both witnessed it, Hidimb and Hidimba were giant asurs. Looks like we have a bite, Hidimba said, glancing at the dashboard where multiple bells were ringing. Those bells were all connected to the vessels that Bhim had just helped himself to. Someone's at the dhaba. Humans, I'll bet, she added.
Must be a whole bunch of them.
Her brother, Hidimb, replied.
They've touched every single pot we had set out. You know, Hidimba, I should give you some credit. When you were telling me all that nonsense about anglerfish, I was completely ignoring you. But your idea to lure humans seems like a good one after all. Judging by the number of pots they've handled, there must be a busload of them. Now go and bring them to me. I'm very hungry.
Hidimba did as she was told. Her brother was more powerful, and he was a bully, especially when he was hungry. So she went. When she got near the dhaba, she saw her prey sleeping. Well, not all of them. Bhim was still working on the gulab javans. One glance at Bhim, and she fell madly in love with him. She was enchanted by his strong muscular arms with which he held the jalebi bucket, and the glint in his eye as he beheld the Srikhand. The way to Hidimba's heart was through his stomach, specifically how he reacted to her cooking. And looking at the pile of empty vessels next to him, he had reacted perfectly. She decided that Bhim was the ideal husband for her. There was no way she was going to feed him to her brother. She approached him, but first she was cautious enough to not approach him in giant Demoness form. Hidimba could shapeshift at will, which is a useful skill if you're a giant Demoness who needs to lure hungry and helpless humans and feed them to your brother. She hastily warned Bhim to walk away before her giant demon brother got impatient and decided to come here. She could even fly him and his family away to safety. The right move for Bhim would be to wonder how this gentle, petite maiden before him could fly, and how she could carry all the Pandavas, including Bhim. But he didn't wonder, because he was awestruck. Hidimba tried to shake him out of his stupor. Let's go now. He already knows that you're here, eating all these dishes that I made.
You made these dishes?
Bhim said in surprise, and it was clear from his tone that he thought she was a keeper. Yes, Hidimba said, and I can cook you many more. But right now, we have to hurry. Let's get out of here quickly. But Bhim wasn't worried, and that made Hidimba even more worried.
You underestimate me, he said calmly. I don't start fights, but I sure finish them.
It won't be a fight, she said. It'll be like a giant hawk swooping down on a sedated snail. Just as she said that, the giant demon walked in. Obviously, he had gotten impatient, as Hidimba had predicted, and he had come down here to investigate why it was taking so long. Hidimba was disappointed as well when he saw that there wasn't a busload of humans for him to eat. There were just 6. Maybe he should eat his sister too, given her obvious betrayal. Bhim calmly got up from his chair.
There, Hidimba. You'll hurt your brother's feelings if you call him a snail. Personally, he looks more like a cockroach to me.
Bhim was looking to provoke the demon, and provocation is what he got. Hidimba was the size of a tree, and his sheer weight would have crushed an ordinary human. As the giant lumbered towards him, Bhim quickly stepped aside. Hidimba passed him, unable to stop because of his massive momentum. Bhim lashed out and punched the demon on his side. The demon collapsed in agony. Hidimba was fascinated. She had never seen her brother in pain. A few moments later, she realized that she had never seen her brother grabbed by the ankle and smashed into the ground repeatedly, like a rag doll. Far, far away, geologists on night duty at the Hastinapur Seismological Center registered the rumblings as a possible earthquake. But they heaved a huge sigh of relief when it stopped. Closer to the scene of the action, though, the rest of the Pandavas remained sleeping, miraculously. Maybe they were all really, really tired. Next morning, Nakul and Sahadev were the first to wake up. They were stunned by what they saw. There was a new mountain next to the dhaba. It hadn't been there last night. Only, it wasn't a mountain. It was the remains of Hidimba. At the dhaba itself, a lovely maiden was serving breakfast, and Bhim was eating it. Bhim and the maiden smiled at each other quite often, and they seemed on extremely friendly terms. Mom, Mom, the twins complained, shaking Kunti awake. Bhim's gone and eaten all the food again. As everyone woke up, Bhim explained the story. He glossed over the part about the dhaba being a trap to attract unsuspecting travelers. Yudhishthir might give him an I told you so stare. It was obvious to everyone how Bhim and Hidimba felt about each other. So the two were married. And it didn't matter that the engagement happened right there, next to the pile of dirty dishes in the dhaba, or that the wedding took place in Hidimba's dark cave. And the thought that Hidimba was an asur while Bhim was not didn't even cross their minds. What mattered was that the two of them were very happy. The Pandavas lived in that forest for a bit. Bhim would spend the day with Hidimba and the evening with his mother and brothers. Soon, a child was born. And I know that your knowledge of the normal gestation period for humans might lead you to conclude that the Pandavas lived in that forest for a long time. But not so. You see, something unusual happened. Everything was sped up. So the child was born within days instead of a several months long pregnancy. And within an hour of his birth, he had grown into a giant himself. His head was pot shaped. And so Bhim and Hidimba called him Ghatotkach. We've met Ghatotkach before in mini episode 43.5. Ghatotkach would go on to play a smallish but pretty important role later in the Mahabharata. But it will be a while before we get to that part of the storyline. The Pandavas do move on and have other adventures, but we'll end it here this time. A couple of notes. Hidimba is also called Hidimbi in some cases. Makes for an easier distinction from her brother's name. I bet that their childhood would have been more than a little confusing, given how similar their names were. Check out the links in the show notes and on the site sfipodcast.com to previous Mahabharata episodes. In the next episode, we'll learn some wisdom from the Panchatantra. Thank you all for the comments on social media and on Spotify's Q&A. I can't directly reply to the questions there, but I'll address them here on the show. Hiranmai, Vaishnavi, Vishruth and Darsh, thank you so much for the feedback. Darsh, thank you for the wishes. It's support from all of you listeners that has made it possible for this to be the #1 Indian mythology podcast, according to FeedSpot's rankings. Vaishnavi, it's a good point regarding the last episode. I did ask Vishnu why he chose those specific conditions. But Vishnu just laughed it off and only told me that it should be very obvious to me. But I confess, I don't have the faintest idea why he chose those conditions. And frankly, I'm a little embarrassed to ask. My best guess is that maybe Vishnu knew exactly what was going to happen, and this 3-year investment was a way to turn around the fortunes of the poor farmer's family. Only, he could have used a less roundabout way. Anyway, after what he put me through in his demonstration of Maya back in episode 0, my guess might not be all that unreasonable. If you have any other comments or suggestions, or if there are any particular stories that you would like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com, or tweet at sfipodcast, or reply to the questions on Spotify's Q&A. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.